Well, good morning. My name is Michael McNeil, and wanted to welcome everyone to our introduction to Portfolio for JIRA. We've been holding these for, I guess, about 6 months now, and they've been quite successful. We've been moving from version to version as Atlassian moves forward with the product. This actual webinar will be for version 2.10. The last one was 2.8, so we have had some updates since then. In the class next week, we'll go kind of through the differential of the various versions. But in this webinar, we don't have time to get into those kind of details. Again, I'm a principal here at Expium, and we have quite a bit. Let me get, obviously having trouble there. Real quick about us, we provide training, consulting, and custom development 100% around the Atlassian ecosystem. So we offer training classes from JIRA Bootcamp all the way through to our advanced portfolio class, which is being held next week. And then we also do consulting, large-scale implementations. Our specialty really is the enterprise. Many of our clients will bring us on for organizational change, even some iterative project management and agile coaching, and then we will build out large systems. And then we have custom development. We have a sister company, Oasis Digital, that provides enterprise development services for companies around the world building single-page web applications. So we have a lot of capabilities, and we will often build custom add-ons for our clients, some of which end up in the marketplace. So let's jump into the content here. I'm going to go through kind of a quick backstory on Portfolio. It's been a product that's been being developed for a few years now. Cover some key concepts, and then we will demonstrate the software. Hopefully we'll have time at the end for some questions. So at the end, if you have some questions, go ahead and type them in chat, and then Brian will be helping me navigate those at the end. In our class next week, it's a much longer class. We have a greater opportunity for some interactive question Q&A session, and actually in some cases working through some challenges in your instance depending on the needs of other students in the class. So real quickly, the backstory, there's been a lot of driving. Scaled Agile probably initially drove the need for Portfolio. So we had many large organizations using JIRA software. They were having a lot of trouble doing release planning across the whole organization, and even some challenges around capacity planning. Portfolio management is something we hear about a lot from clients as a particular topic, and not to be confused with Portfolio, the product. And so there were a lot of people that were building tooling, including us, around how to manage this, building a separate initiative management project in JIRA with a special issue type and the funding process around it, and rolling up various projects into planning projects, etc. So Atlassian jumped in and built version 1.x. I don't think anybody would argue that version 1 was very rough, and it really does live up to its name. It was like a minimum viable product. They got it to market, and they learned a lot. Went back to the drawing board and rebooted with Portfolio for JIRA 2.0. We did not recommend using version 1.x in the enterprise. We do recommend using version 2.0 and above. It is a good product and provides a lot of capabilities that the ecosystem has been needing. Like I mentioned at the beginning, we're currently on version 2.10. It'll probably change this afternoon or tomorrow, but it's so the next class will be based on whatever the current version is at the time. Some very important concepts. Portfolio introduces the idea of an unlimited hierarchy. Traditionally in JIRA, you have a built-in hierarchy in JIRA software with epics and stories and subtasks. And then you have generally a 2-level hierarchy in the rest of JIRA with issues, full-blooded issue types, and subtask issue types, and you can't really go another layer below that. With Portfolio, they give you the opportunity to build out your hierarchy, and we'll be looking at that briefly here and again in more depth next week. There's the idea of themes. Themes allow you to measure the work that the organization has been doing against your we typically see this used as it being against your organizational goals. And we'll talk about that when we get into the demo a little bit more. But you can assign an epic to a theme, and then you know that the hours spent against that particular item is being measured against what your initiative or your priority is for the organization. Say it's we want to spend X amount of our time servicing our clients versus servicing our internal staff. So if you had an IT organization and you needed to see, well, how much time are they spending supporting our client base, which is making us money, versus supporting our internal staff, and you can measure that and track that over time. There's the idea of teams and shared teams. So unlike in JIRA, you can actually create, rather than it just being ad hoc based on who's assigned with issues, you can actually create development teams. And you can have multiple, and you can identify your teams, whether it be in development or other projects, and understand that. And you can share that across portfolio plans. And we'll be looking at that a little bit as well. And then there's stages and skills. As we all know, as items are worked, they go through a process. There might be a design stage. There might be an implementation stage, testing if it's software. There might be in construction, there might be design. And then there might be the bidding, and then there might be the actual construction, and then there's the punch out, and then there's the actual transition to ownership to the owner. That process can be, so it's the idea is that work goes through stages to be completed. And that's a very powerful concept that's added in portfolio, because it allows you to come up with what's our average across these different stages, and understand where our time is being spent. And then because we know the stages, and then we can identify the skills, which is the next item here on the key concepts, because we know the skills that are needed to go into those stages, we can then do capacity planning, and we can understand where our bottlenecks are, even in a very complex organization. This is very important if you're looking at something like Scaled Agile, or you're looking at productivity across multiple product lines. We have a couple of large IT manufacturing firms as clients that have hundreds of products, and some of their software spans all of their products, and some of their software spans just their individual products, and then they have hardware issues and bug tracking. And being able to understand the skill sets that go into correcting all these various things and where your capacity is can really aid in not only just can we ramp up our teams, can we move people around within teams, and then what do we do with this company that we just acquired? So portfolio kind of gives you visibility into that. And then there's a new feature that is program management. And the idea is that you can have multiple, historically you could create a plan in portfolio and it had a certain scope. And then now we've got this idea of programs, and this was released at Summit last year. It's available on server only, not on cloud, but it allows you to have multiple plans within a program, and it kind of rolls them up, and we'll be looking at that as well. So I'm trying to move quickly here because we have a lot to cover in the demonstration. So let me pop out here. And I'm gonna jump into, I'm gonna reference over here some of my other information. So when you go into portfolio, this is the screen you get dumped into. So you will have a schedule up at the top with this release bar across the bottom that kind of shows your timeline. And it'll either be red or green, and it identifies the start and end of various releases. And then the bottom pane on the scope, I meant to have the scope view. And then the bottom pane, when you go into the main view, will have a list of your issues. Now, I'm gonna do a quick orientation here. If you're familiar with the issue search or the issue list page within JIRA, some of this will be familiar. So you have the ability to filter down what's shown on the screen. You can see what projects are included, and you can deselect any if it's a multiple project plan. You can take a look at particular releases, and you can also take a look at particular teams. You can also filter by particular keywords. There's not an advanced, so you can't use JQL here, but there you do have the ability to drop and take a look at some of the other axes by which you could filter information. So there's quite a bit of capability here. And to be blunt, it's very easy to get yourself in trouble. So I would encourage everyone to build out a development instance, load some of your data in that development instance, and then start playing with it, because there are some unintended consequences if you just turn everybody loose with Portfolio on a production instance. So what we can see here in the top section are my individual epics. And so if I can highlight an epic, and this will show me the start and end date for that particular epic. I can take a look at others. If I had dependencies, which we'll look at a little bit later on, it would show that. In the bottom pane, if I click on an issue, epic SUR2, then it gives me this opportunity to view the issue, very much like you do in an Agile board when you click on an issue and it pops up a pane. I can, very importantly, add dependencies here. I can even create new epics here and do some minor editing. I expect the functionality of this pane to expand over time. I can edit in line some of these fields that are displayed, just like you can in an Agile board. So with that, one very confusing aspect of Portfolio, and they have been working on this extensively, it was much worse in 1.x than it is now, is the administration of these things. So we've got the first one. You have one, let's see, there's one place here to configure Portfolio. If you're an administrator, you will also have this option here to configure Portfolio. And then the top pane is configured here, and the bottom pane is configured here. This is very important because oftentimes you will want to do something and you can't remember exactly where to do it. There's even a fifth place where configuration occurs that we'll talk about when we get to themes. So some other screens. So this is the scope screen. When we move to the other screens, the team screen, you'll see the top pane stays exactly the same. This is actually where I was when I dropped in earlier. And so the schedule remains up top, but the bottom pane has changed to display my particular team on this project. And then if I go to, I can see here what my total number of hours are, my iteration length, I can actually see the members of the team. And this is where I can add members for scenario planning that are not necessarily synced back to the main instance. So there's if you have multiple teams in the project or in the Portfolio plan, that'll show up here. And then there's also the release view. And again, the top pane stays the same, and you see your releases down at the bottom. And you'll notice that one of the releases is red. The rest of them are not. That shows me why part of my release bar is red, and we will get into the process of correcting that here in a little while. So the fourth screen is the report screen. If I go to reports, it's on, I'll show you that a little bit later. They have added this new report for dependencies, but I have the option of looking at various reports. This looks very similar because as I go through this is essentially the panes we were just looking at. So this gives you the ability to export some of this information and share it. There are some additional items like capacity. I can take a look at my sprints. I can look at my target schedule versus my calculated schedule, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and I can look at themes. And I'll go ahead and do a quick overview of themes here. I mentioned earlier in the key features that themes allows you to track your work against your business priorities. So say we wanted to identify that this particular group needed to spend 25% of their time on customer support, 35% of their time on operations, 25%, 15%, you get the idea. Then we have the estimates, the roll-up of the various issues that the team is working on. And this is how the estimated breakdown looks. And then there's the actual breakdown. So this actually is quite powerful. If you're actually tracking your time, if your teams are tracking their time in JIRA, this information just gets rolled up as soon as you assign an epic or another issue type to a theme. All the sub issues related to it get rolled into that particular target. So if I go back to the scope view, we can see here under the themes, here's my epics, and here are the themes they're assigned to. And then if I go down at a lower level in the hierarchy to the story level, I have a lot more issues down here. And you can see they're all assigned. Now this all happened based on my assignment of epics to a particular theme. So let's go back to the view we were in. Try not to be terribly confusing. If I go back, and I'm going to go back to reports, the fifth place you configure portfolio is in this themes report. The only place you can configure themes is here. So that is an important thing to remember. You actually configure the themes in the actual report, not in one of the configuration screens. So let's see. So now we want to look at the configuration of these. If I go up here to the primary, this is the primary place you configure a portfolio plan. So if I go into configuration, I have a number of options, and we'll go over these in more depth next week. But there's quite a bit here related to some configuration around how errors are handled, the planning mode. This is your estimating mode. Are you using days? Are you using hours? Or are you using story points? You can set your sprint duration and your default weekly capacity. So there's a lot of defaults associated with portfolio based just trying to get a plan working, because you don't always have all the details built out initially, but you want to kind of just get kind of the shape of what's going on. So it will default to some of these items. So it'll default to a 2-week sprint. It'll default to 200 hours for a team. And then you can take a look at unestimated items. So if you have a scope, which is what we refer to the breadth of issues that are moved into a portfolio plan, if you have a scope identified and only half of those issues are estimated, the system knows that it's going to be giving you bogus information. So you can have it define unestimated item scheduling in the scheduling algorithm based on target dates that are identified in the issues, or based on some default estimates. And then, or you can set it to have unestimated items ignored and have them not impact the schedule. This can be quite dangerous, as anybody experienced with project management knows. So, some of these are not terribly important for this first run. So you can obviously, everybody should, if you're familiar with JIRA, you've seen this before. This is where you can set your working days. Some organizations have a shorter or longer working day, say they work 4/10s instead of 5/8s, and some are more of a 24/7 operation. So you can actually set that here, and you can add your holidays, your company holidays, etc. here. Issue sources. This is where it'll identify what is coming into the portfolio plan. And right now, this plan that I am in is based on a single project, successful rabbit, and I can actually change some settings related to that. I also have the opportunity to bring in custom fields. If your instance has a number of custom fields and you need to use some of those for portfolio, those can be brought in as well. And then there's the commit of changes. And this is a good time for me to mention portfolio is designed somewhat similar to source control. And anybody with a software development background will understand, basically you're creating a branch when you create a portfolio plan. You can make a number of edits to the plan, and then you actually don't reflect any changes that you've made, whether it's editing of issues, assignment of issues, expanding of teams, adding new epics. All of the changes that you make are not synced back to JIRA unless you hit that commit button. So as we make changes here in a little bit to the plan, you'll see them stack up. Like for example, when I was preparing for this, I had 300, 400 changes that had not been synced back to JIRA. So the idea is that you can actually have people that do not have the right to sync back to JIRA build scenarios. So for example, a project lead might have his 3 technical leads on 3 different projects build scenarios based on and actually compare what kind of ideas they come up with in scenario planning. And then only the project lead can actually sync those changes back to JIRA. So then we have permissions, and this is where this is what I was just referring to. You can have people edit. Actually, that's not where I was referring to. This is plan access. So you can have people that are editors and people that are viewers. So you have the ability to add editors to plans and have other people that can simply view it. For example, if you're using Portfolio to reflect up to the C-suite in an organization, and you want your COO to be able to pull up and take a look at Portfolio and see where all the projects are, but not necessarily make changes to all of them because he doesn't have the context for what's going on, then that you can make that person a viewer of the plan and they don't have the ability to edit the plan. And then I'll show you in a little bit where the administrator of the instance can change permissions akin to what I was talking about with changes being committed. And then we have an important concept of stages and skills. So when you go into a new portfolio plan, this is empty and you have to create this. So I added 3 stages, and these are the stages of work that are required to complete a given issue. And then I assigned a percentage. So each individual item in JIRA, say an item might have 100 hours estimated on it. And so 10% of that time, or 10 hours, would be assigned to design, 70 hours to implementation, and 20 hours to testing. And then the skills I referred to are the breakdown of those hours to particular types of skills. And then these skills are actually assigned to individual team members, as we'll see here in a little bit. And then the combination of all that data gives you the ability to actually plan your capacity and see impact when you move one person from one team to another, or you add a new hire into a team, or say you have to shrink the organization a little bit because of demands elsewhere or a lack of demand. And you have to see what's going to be the impact on my delivery schedule if I pull a couple people out of my team. So this is a very important part of utilizing Portfolio successfully. And we'll take a look here back in the other screens now that I've had a chance to look at that here in a moment. And then we have scenarios. And so I'm going to enable scenarios here. And if we have an initial scenario for this plan, and then I'm going to create a staff up scenario, and I'm going to base it on the initial scenario. And then I'm going to create a scenario to staff down. Now, I have to be careful here because now that I'm in my plan and I've created these things, when I go back to the plan here, you'll see it's going to tell me I'm in the initial scenario. So now I have a new selection on this screen that'll allow me to change my particular scenario. So I'm going to come back to this in a little bit in a moment. But I want to get into the other configuration areas and specifically talk about permissions. So if I look at administration here, get into my instance, I'm into the portfolio setup, and it immediately drops me into permissions. So we have folks that you can add staff members to be portfolio administrators. We can identify who are the users to be able to create, view, and edit plans. And then this portfolio restricted user is what I was referring to earlier. This restricts any user, this particular user, from being able to commit changes back to JIRA. This is a very important permission, and I would encourage you to use it for new users of Portfolio and the majority of users of Portfolio. You really only want to have a key subset of staff that are using Portfolio that can make changes to JIRA proper, because changes could be committed back that make thousands of edits to issues across the instance and can really wreak havoc if you're not careful. Keep an eye on my time. And then you have the ability, here's where you can, it's that same permission for the administrator to add viewers. And then there are always features just like JIRA that come in with the labs idea, things that you can try. That's how program management came in initially, was as a Portfolio labs feature. And then shared team management. And we haven't looked at shared teams yet, but this gives you the ability to tell us who can set up those teams. And the idea is that you have groups of people that can be selected as a part of creating a plan. You don't have to manually create the teams every time, which was a problem early on with Portfolio. If you wanted to use capacity planning, you had to have somebody that was manually creating the teams every time. And now we have the ability to have shared teams across Portfolio. Here in this actual setup screen, and this is only available to the administrators, you can edit your portfolio hierarchy. So this is where you can adjust the hierarchy within Portfolio, and I can add, let's see, I can add any of my existing issue types to this. I can set my my hierarchy levels here, and if I have 12 different types of issue types, I can actually have those organized in a way that makes sense for my organization. For example, typically in an instance when we would do this, we would use initiative above epic. Some organizations have initiative, then major epic, then stories, then features, and then subtasks. So there's different organizations use this differently, and this gives you the ability to make how Portfolio works match the way your organization organizes your work. And then let's see, Portfolio dependencies. This is where you can decide what dependencies or issue link types are exposed within Portfolio and which ones are used by Portfolio. And in this case, the normal dependency is blocked or blocked by, and you can set that here. And then there's some beta features that they have that'll come through similar to the labs idea. So if I go back to my plan, here, and I'm going to drop admin access, make that go away. Let's see, we've configured. Okay, setting priority, and I think I spotted a question come through. Yes, I can. There's a feature here that is related to, and there's a web page. We can send this out in the follow-up email if it's helpful. But Atlassian in their Portfolio site has a good explanation of the scheduling algorithm. The scheduling algorithm is kind of the core of Portfolio. It's how it takes all the data from JIRA and all the data we've added to it with themes and stages and skills, and then it creates this schedule, and it actually projects what your reality is likely to look like based on that schedule, based on the issue links, based on the priority. Now it makes an assumption about what the priority looks like when it comes in, but I can change the priority here by just dragging and dropping these around. So I've just reordered these back to the way I want them. Now wait, I want this one. I want these in this order, so I'm going to put these back in numerical order, and then I can calculate, and it's possible that changes my dates. So let's see. So again, now I hadn't talked about the calculate button. So because this does not live calculate changes as you make them, so there are committed. It tracks issues that have not been committed back to JIRA, and it also gives you the trigger to execute the scheduling algorithm, which is quite complex and can use quite a bit of CPU. So if this was trying to live calculate all the time, Portfolio could really be a drag on an instance. But this gives you the ability to make a bunch of edits, and then see what the consequences are of your actions. For example, I'm going to go ahead and create a dependency here, and then we'll see the impact on the schedule. So if I take a look at this epic, and I'm going to add a dependency here, I'm going to say it's blocked by epic number 7. And so I add this dependency. I now have a dependency in the system, but it's not been reflected in the schedule yet. So I need to execute the scheduling algorithm. So I click calculate, and now it's changed, and it's adjusted how issues are laid out, what the work order is, and has identified, okay, I have this dependency here, and so SUR6 cannot be worked on until SUR7 is complete. And so this has also blown up my release schedule. As you can see, my whole bar is red now. So I'm going to, we'll take a look here in a little bit on how to fix that. So now if I go back to my reports, I have created a singular dependency in this instance, and that is an actual issue link. So if I take a look here, this should look familiar to anybody familiar with JIRA. And this is an actual issue link. And if I synchronize this back to JIRA, it will actually show up in the issue. So I can add these dependencies. I can make edits here, much like I would with, this is almost like a complex bulk editor. And it gives you the ability to edit some things that you can't do effectively in the filter list mechanism. So if I take a look now in my reports, if you remember, anybody who was paying attention earlier would note that I came into the dependency report earlier, and now it was empty previously, and now I have this dependency identified. And in a larger instance, for example, here's another instance. I have hundreds of dependencies across my issues, and these are impacting the particular schedule of these projects. So going back to the instance we've been working with, it'll start tracking these as they go. But like I mentioned earlier, these issues are not committed back to JIRA proper. So if I pull this up, it'll actually give me a list of everything that I have edited. And I could choose to commit that back to the JIRA instance. And then if I wanted to, there is a limited ability to revert changes. And I can go through and manually select which changes I want to commit and which ones I don't want to commit back to the main instance. And these can build up over time. Like I said, I was about 400, I think, at one time as I was building out some of the data. So when we look at, that's priority. We talked a little bit about editing. Okay, so now let's talk about shared teams. Let me see, I believe I go here. No, it's up here, I apologize. Too many places to edit portfolio and things do move around. Here we go. Under the main portfolio menu, we can manage shared teams. These are the shared teams of the instance. And you can also manually add teams as a part of your scenario. But for example, here is my team. And anytime that I create a new portfolio plan, I will have the option of adding these 4 teams to it and any other teams that I create. So this is a good mechanism. If you have hundreds of teams in your instance, those can be pre-created. Those can be managed all in one singular spot. So if I select a particular, I can look at, here's the people in my organization. This is the user list. And, features are still being fleshed out on this particular area. I would expect there to be more user management here. And then I can also create my skills. So these are the skills that will automatically be by default added to any portfolio plan that gets created. Now, unfortunately, I can't assign those skills to a particular user here, so that then that aspect of it automatically flows into a new portfolio plan. But I imagine that will be coming. And just like here, for example, I can't add those skills to the individual here. I can just add the work hours, and I can add and remove people to and from teams. So this is more of a limited administrative area to make those teams. You can create teams, etc. It's very useful from an administration standpoint to allow multiple people to build portfolio plans and use existing teams and not have to create them, but it's not very good if you are the heavy portfolio user. You won't be needing access to this very often. So if I go back to my plan here, I want to take a look at teams within the plan construct. So a nod there to one of my co-workers. So here within the plan, I have my teams, and I can create a team here, but this team will be only reflected in this plan. It won't be a shared team. And but here in this editing of the team, I can actually decide what stages this particular person is involved with, and within the stages, what skills they have. So for example here, I have, this is probably not a great example. I think it's actually better over here. So I'm gonna go to teams here on this particular project. Yes. No, it's doing everybody here as well. All right, so usually you would only have some folks that are set up for different capabilities, and you can actually very discreetly identify who has what skills, whether it be front end, database, scripts, business logic, could be, it could be purely testing, could be other aspects, maybe you have Node.js as a middle tier on your application, so your front end folks have maybe capabilities of front end and middle tier because they're good with JavaScript, but they don't have the server backend or business logic or database capabilities. And this is where you can identify that. Or you may have a very narrow, you may have a need for somebody that has scripting language, Perl or other knowledge that they can then apply to the project. You can very discreetly identify what the various capabilities of your staff are. Like under design, I have a differentiation here between design and being an architect. So you might have a designer involved building the UI, but you need to have an architect involved putting together the detailed business logic of the application. This allows you to kind of edit and for this plan, identify how the scheduling algorithm identifies staff availability to work on issues. So this then rolls up. I've made these changes. I hit calculate. It's now going to calculate that as a part of my scheduling algorithm. Doesn't look like it impacted things much. And now I've got the ability to then begin to look at capacities. So now that I've identified skills and I've identified stages, now I can go over to my reports, and I can actually begin to take a look at capacity. Well, this view isn't very helpful. So just like the other views, I can actually identify, okay, I want to look at this by team. Oh, wait, I've only got one team here, so that's not going to help me much. I want to look at it by person. So here I've got identified, here's my staff, and here is their capacity. So I can see that how much is assigned to them in each sprint. Since the sprints are 2 weeks, it's going to, this person had 25 hours a week likely identified. So that's Jennifer Bloomberg. So we can actually validate that things are working. Yep, she has 25 hours a week, which means she has 50 hours to apply to an iteration. If I go back and I say this person is 40 hours a week, I can now calculate again. Go back to reports, and now you can see that she has 80 hours now applied to this. And again, I can see the impact of these things to my schedule I'm down at the bottom of on my release bar at the bottom. So now if somebody is oversubscribed, you can see this particular person is oversubscribed. They're overloaded by just a little bit, a tiny increment. So let's actually go back and let's see. We'll create a problem here by reducing this person to 25 hours a week, I think, and this person to 4 hours a week, and go back to 25 hours a week here, and we can then calculate. We can see our schedule ran out a little bit. I go back to reports, and let's see, that should have blown things up, but it did not. Or do I need to refresh? Let's move back here. That'll be interesting. That'll be, if I go back to capacity, just gonna, it does it. All right. That's the way it is. I have not blown it up enough, so I need to blow it up a little further. Let's create some real bottlenecks by unchecking. I'm just obviously randomly doing this. Let's calculate again. That should really break things further. Now we've pushed things way out, and we can see that it's going to take us a lot longer to get that work done because we have a lot less capacity on the work. And we can then, if we had multiple teams, we can reflect that by team. So if you have a very complex plan with many teams, you can view that differently. So let's take a look at why we have not been able to go green here. So when you want to redo release planning, this bar, as I mentioned earlier, is a schedule. It shows the start and completion of each particular release. So I'm going to go on my reports, I'm going to look at releases. And this is very similar to the release board here, except that I can see a little bit more detail in this one on the reports. So this is actually my release that's causing me trouble, 0.3. It looks like it's probably oversubscribed. And so if I go back to my release board, so 0.3 is identified red here as well. If I edit this, I can see it's set for a fixed release date. And it's set for January 24th. And it is significantly overbooked. Well, what happens? I can set release dates based on a fixed release date, but I can also let the scheduling algorithm tell me when I need to do it. Oh, wow, it just went green. So if I hit calculate now my release schedule is green, but it's calculated to be April 14th, not January 24th. And obviously, if January 24th was an important date, I need to take a look and understand what's going on in my various releases. So let's go. So if we look here, we can start to see, I'm going to look at this at the story level. So now I can see, oh, well, part of the problem is I've got 0.3 oversubscribed. So I could actually go here. I could actually go to edit. And then if I click view version, that'll take me back to the release hub in JIRA, and then I will be able to make my edits to that release and do some things to improve the overloading of the group there. Now let's go back to my team. I'm going to repair this brokenness of what I did. 8, 40, and then my teams are very capable, so they can do about everything. And I believe I removed this one as well, and this one as well. That should be pretty close. So let's recalculate. Now we're back to a reasonable set of sprints. Now if I go look at my report now that things aren't broken, Now I'm scheduled for April 29th, which is an improvement, but still not great. Let's see. But this gives you the ability now to see and understand what's going on with this release bar. Now, what you just saw me do, and I did not cover very well earlier, was you just saw this top view change from a scheduled set of items to a sprint-based set of items. Well, that's because I'm looking at a different level of my hierarchy here at the top. So if I look at the epic level, that shows me the schedule based on the issues that are included in that epic. And if I drop down to the story level, now it gives me the list of issues at that level, and the organization of my stories is typically by sprints. Now the color coding here is interesting. So right now the color coding is based on stage. So some of these issues are design, some of these issues are implementation, and some of these issues are testing. I didn't go through and set that up very well. But now let's look at it via themes. So now I can actually look at all my issue assignment based on themes. Oh, let me make one comment. You'll probably be asking to yourself, if you're on top of everything we've talked about, say I've got my stages apply to every issue. I have a design stage, an implementation stage, a testing stage. This is based on how far through the process are we. So how much time has already been, these are at the design stage. So once enough work has been done, that issue gets moved to the implementation stage. And some of the items are already at the implementation stage because they've already been worked enough that they're beyond that 10% that we identified. And then once they get to a certain point, they'll be at the testing stage because enough work has been done. And that's where these are the items that are basically close to completion. Now, if I switch to theme, these are color coded based on my themes. And if we go back and we take a look at the themes, we can see that we've got the internal support, marketing, operations, and customer support. So I can understand then a little more of what's going on in my work based on this. So it still tells me the stage, but I happen to know which theme these items are associated with. I can also see those themes here down below. And interestingly enough, if I want to look at it by themes, but I need to know what stages I'm at, let's see, it's not, that's a bummer. So there is a little variation here between cloud and server. But so here at the bottom, I was able to select what column showed up here. So I was able to see my theme here. I can add other fields that are familiar in JIRA, labels, components, or I can add a custom field here as well. So if I select source, and then I close this out, then it'll tell me not only if you remember, we were able to set what the scope is of a project based on multiple sources. This helps me then identify that. So that's let me make sure I'm covering everything here. Capacity, calculate, commit, editing, priority. So now scenarios. Actually, before I go into scenarios, I want to create a plan. I want to get you through the process of creating a plan so you can actually see what happens. We've just got 10 minutes left, and I want to be able to get to questions. Can you set, no, the commit changes permission is based on, I'm going to go ahead and answer this question now. Commit changes permission, all right, I'm not going to blow this up, Brian. I will let you ask the question here at the end because otherwise I need to repeat the question. So we're going to create a new plan here. I apologize for my ADD. And now I create a plan, and then we'll go through programs quickly. If I create a plan, it gives me the option to name it. I call this demo. This takes you through a wizard. I can select a board, a project, or a filter. So, but I can also select multiples. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select, and I'm also going to include an entire project here. And I have no idea what I'm going to get. I'm going to say my estimating is in hours. Click next. Now here are all the releases that are currently identified. So if I have a particular release I'm worried about, I could actually have my plan oriented just around that particular release. So select all here. Click next. And now I can select my teams. Remember I mentioned earlier the shared teams. Well, here I can select the team that's working on these 3 items that are within the scope. So I'm saying my instance of JIRA has all these issues across all these projects. Now I'm identifying the scope of what set of issues are going to go into portfolio, and those issues are assigned to these various teams. And so I'm going to include these. And now I have my list of issues. So it's showing me these at the epic level. And I can select all or deselect all. I can select all. And I can also look at this at the story level if I want to exclude something that's particularly problematic. And then I select done. And it drops me into a new plan with all my stuff. And it does a lot of calculation. And so then you can go through a refinement process. But I wanted you to at least see the creation of what the creation of that looks like. Now I'm going to go back to SUR, and we're going to do some quick things with scenarios. And then we will look at programs, and then we will be out of time. So I have the 3 scenarios I created earlier. And now I'm going to go to, so I've got my initial scenario, which is the one I'm on. I'm going to go to my staff down. And it's going to load up that particular portfolio plan. I look at my teams. And I'm going to have to say I've got to move George across to another team. So he's going to go to 0. And same thing with Lyda. She's got to go to another team. And so now I'm down 2 staff members. And I'm going to calculate. And my schedule changes dramatically. And so that's this scenario. Now I've staffed down. And then I can also staff up. So if I go to staff up and I'm looking at teams, and I expand this, here's where I can add people. So I can add existing users in the instance. Let's add Conrad. And we will add, maybe I'll add, I want to add a new hire. So I'm going to create this new hire. And now I've got this create virtual user button available to me. So I'm going to create this virtual user. This user only exists in this particular plan. And I'm going to assign 40 hours a week. And I'm going to add new hire number 2. And now I'm going to recalculate, and I'm going to identify that these are very broad-ranging folks that are very capable, so they can work throughout the process, very senior, and it cost me a lot of money, but look what they do to my schedule. They speed up the delivery of my various projects. So they didn't turn me green because of my broken delivery date, I believe, on a release. If I look at that, yep. So we're still broken here because we're still oversubscribed in this particular release. But now I've got these different scenarios, and I can look. I want to compare my bar back to my initial scenario, and I can actually begin to look at these side by side. So I can staff down. And I can staff up. So this gives you the ability to create this scenario idea. And we'll go over this in more detail in the class next week. So now the last thing I want to cover real quickly is the idea of programs. The view on the programs is different. And in this case, I've created a program that includes my two other plans that I've been showing you for the SUR project and the SIA project. So I can look at my scope and I can see all of my issues. But more importantly, I can look at my schedule. And let's calculate based on some of the changes we've been making. And here's my updated schedule. And this is now reflecting the actual look and feel of my particular plans that I have included in this program. Now, I have intentionally done something here. If you remember, I created a dependency in the SUR project that is not being reflected here. It's not being reflected here because changes that are not moved back into JIRA do not automatically go into the program. So the program is based on combining two plans as they are stated today in JIRA, not through your scenario editing. So this is you have to be very aware of what's really going on here. So my dependencies are not going to show up here as you would necessarily expect, because if I go back to the epic level here, I removed it. Okay, that's why it's not. That's the other reason why it's not showing up. So if I go back to scope and I add this dependency that I added earlier, and then we'll get to questions. Blocks, SUR7. Add dependency. So if I go back to my dev plan and I calculate, this is going to be a very useful thing to know. Let's calculate it. Let's see if that dependency shows up here. Nope, it does not. So if I go back to my particular plan, so now I've got my dependency here. So let's go back to the program and we will calculate again. Does not show up. If I go back and I commit these changes, which include adding a dependency link, I've committed these changes. And then I go back to dev program and I calculate again. Now we have our dependency showing up on the program. So with that said, I am going to go a few minutes over to be sure we answer any questions. Brian, what kind of questions do we have so far?
To start with, we have a question about settings. Can you set the commit changes permission on a per project basis?
That is on a per user basis, or it could be based on, if I go back here, if I go to administration, and I'm looking at permissions, I can add, so if the committed users, I can add groups to this. I do not have the ability today to add project roles, but I expect that to expand out further. But you technically could create, you can't do it at a project level, except you can create groups based on a particular project and a particular set of permissions around a project. So yes, you can literally back into the feature, but it would be some extra work on the part of your administrator.
Therefore, you can give one person the ability to commit a change for one project and another person the ability to commit for another project.
Yes. Well, you basically would create a group for each project that is specifically designed to give you the permission. Now, ultimately, I think we're going to be able to do permissions here, much like we do in the rest of JIRA, et cetera. So, good deal. And it looks like some other questions were answered throughout the process. So any leftovers there, Brian, that I should expand on?
Not that I can see.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining. We'll have a half-day portfolio class next week. Information on that is available on our website. That'll probably also go out in a follow-up link, follow-up email from this seminar. Appreciate your attendance, and hopefully everybody has a great day.